Hi boys and girls, Mr. Pura here, and I'm making a short video just to clear a few doubts that some of you are having. I guess it is a common issue that most of you is facing, so let's get into this. So for this task, I would first start with the issue with the distance that is between the port of Yokohama, which is in Japan, and the port of San Francisco, which is in USA. Now, I know what I've mentioned is when, calculating distance for, through like using the steamship, you have to go to ports.com. However, there's an issue with ports.com for this particular case. Let's have a look. What do I mean? If you go to ports.com and you put in Port of Yokohama and Port of San Francisco, great. You see, you get like 20,812 nautical miles, which is like, I think, more than 30,000 kilometers something. You should not be using this distance, okay? Because according to the story by Jules Verne, that is 80 Days Around the World, you can see here for the path or the route that is shown on ports.com, it takes 86 days. When you look at your table, it took only 22 days. Hopefully you can see this. It took only 22 days going from Yokohama to San Francisco. Therefore, Phileas Fogg and his assistant, they basically went from Yokohama to San Francisco through a direct route. So therefore, why the ports.com is wrong? Look, if you zoom out, what you would notice is the software is basically showing you like they've gone like the distance if you go the other way. You can see there is this massive Pacific Ocean here. So this is Japan here. You can see China, Japan, and this is the United States. Going from Yokohama to San Francisco, the direct path is this one here. Okay. So I've simply Googled this. It's only 8,283 kilometers. Okay. 8,283 kilometers. That's a direct path. The one that is shown on ports.com, unfortunately, is not the direct path. You can see it's pretty much kind of going the other way. That is going through the Indian Ocean, Suez Canal, Mediterranean Sea, Atlantic Ocean, etc. So that's the longest path. So you don't want to use this value. All right. So for the distance between Yokohama and San Francisco, use a direct distance. Okay, which is basically given on Google, like by Google Maps. So that's number one. Hopefully that's clear. Next question and doubts that we were having is about the graph. All right. So when you have to draw a graph, so here the question is saying plot the different destinations on the graph for their journey around the world. Remember that each new destination, all right, let me zoom in here so that you get to see, it's saying each new destination becomes the starting point for the next journey. All right, so the first stage has been done for you. So you basically will have all your values, right? And every time, like we're going from one place to another, there is a certain amount of distance that was covered, right? So from London to Suez, it was like about 3,000 kilometers. From Suez to Mumbai, 5,917 kilometers. Now, the question that I was getting is, what about the last part of the journey, sir? That is, eventually they're going back to London, right? Eventually they're going back to London because they're going around the world. Here's the thing though, when you plot a graph, and if you remember in the previous lessons, you always have to look at the axis. So the y-axis here is showing distance in 1,000 kilometers, and the x-axis is showing time in days. So in your table, the time in days, this is what you got. So you're going to plot these. Obviously, you have to add them up. If you remember, I did explain this earlier. What about the distance? Well, look on the y-axis. It's labeled distance. It does not say distance from London, right? It's simply saying distance. So the distance covered by these individuals. So therefore, in this case, the question was, sir, does it mean that when they're going from New York City and going back to London, would the graph look something like this? I don't know, like what values you people getting, all right? But like, I don't know. Let's pretend like the graph is going up something like that, like that. And then you're like, yeah, for the last few days, so the last, like from New York to Liverpool and things like that, it's going to take like 7 days. I don't know. I'm just kind of making this up. And the question is, the last part of the journey, should it kind of go back to London? And the answer here is no. Why is it so? Because the y-axis is basically indicating distance, simply the distance, which means it's just how much distance it's basically covering. Sorry, microphone here. So the distance they're covering. Therefore, from New York City to Liverpool and from Liverpool to London, the graph should keep going up because you're simply showing how much distance is going from New York City to Liverpool and from Liverpool to London. Now, in what particular case would it have gone down? The graph would have gone down to 0 if, only if, all right? Your guess. In what case? Only if here on the y-axis, the labeling would have been distance from London. Then, from London, sorry. Then the graph would have been different because if we say distance from London, obviously at the start your distance from London is 0 because you're already in London, and at the end, if you're going back to London, right, you obviously once you get back to London, it should get back to 0 here because the distance should be 0 from London, right, because you're back in London. But for this particular question, as you can see, so the big lesson here is always look at the labeling, always look at the labeling of the axis to decide how the graph, how you should be drawing it. Okay, hopefully this answers it. Last thing. So I was saying the last thing that you have to remember here, I got a question about rounding the numbers, the distances. To decide how much you have to round it, look again at your graph. So your graph here on the y-axis, we can see that 1, 2, 3, 4, like 5 small squares represents 5,000 kilometers, isn't it? Because it's clearly shown here. Therefore, one small square on the y-axis is 1,000 kilometers. Do we agree? Therefore, your values that you're getting up there, you have to round these values to the nearest 1,000. So that's easier for you to to plot. All right, so round your numbers to the nearest 1,000. Okay, so hopefully this helps. There were a few among you who had issues with deciding the place. I would suggest, for instance, I got a message about Victoria, Hong Kong. When you type this in Google or post.com, there's so many of them. Like pick the main one, just Victoria, the ports. Okay, the port of Victoria, Hong Kong, and very likely. And even if you pick some slightly different port in Hong Kong, it will not make a huge difference. Okay, because the values would pretty much be the same. All right, that's it from from me. So in today's lesson, make sure that you complete this task. Unfortunately, I could not give you like a printout of this. So what I suggest, 2 things you're gonna do. All right, obviously you can fill up the table on the Word document. Drawing obviously the graph on the Word document would be challenging, except if you have words like me here and you have like a stylus or something like that, you can draw directly on this, just like I'm doing, and then you save everything. These answers as well, you can fill up this Word document. Now, what I suggest is, I know some of you, you've done this on graph paper. Please do so. Just make sure that when you're drawing on graph paper, you are using the same scale. Okay, so use same scale. What do I mean? What I mean is, well, you can see here the scale here is one big square with like this 5 small square. Here on the x-axis, one big square shows 10 days. So you do the same on your graph paper. Same thing, all right? Same number of squares. Label the axis the same way, and then you draw your graph on the graph paper. And then what you do is take a picture of it, all right? And guess what? You can take that picture and paste it, okay, on the Word document. Paste on Word document, the same Word document. and then you save everything, and then you upload to ManageBack. You're done. All right. So hopefully this will help you finish the task today. Make sure and cross-check everything, and do your best to submit everything by the end of today. Take care. Of course, if you have any other questions, please send them to me.